Hello, this is Dr. Jean, dear future people. Today we are going to talk about space. Well, this has nothing to do with the space of popular mythology. We are going to talk about space not even in the scientific sense, but we are going to talk about space as a concept. Remember, we talked about time before. Now, we are going to see that space is really a model, okay? And it is a model based on a projection and abstraction of spatial orientation, okay? So we have left, we have right, okay? We have up and we have down, and we have depth. And our sense organs, in other words, the vestibular system right here, our hearing and seeing faculty, our proprioception in our joints, they all create this particular form of orientation, okay? So we, in order to operate well, we have a direction of we have a concept of direction, okay? We have a concept of depth, okay? And so from that, when we project this out, then we are going to have an outward extension of this concept, and that is what we regard as space. Now, if we oversimplify this, okay, then we are going to imagine the most primitive model, and that primitive model is the idea of effect-free space. In this model, as we already mentioned before, we only have spatial points that are separate and they are uniform, okay? And the only difference between them is their position in terms of x, y, and z axis right here. So this point is totally equivalent to an imaginary point here, 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 or here. The only difference being the spatial position as opposed to these axes, okay? So now, space, like this model, like any model, okay, is shaped by the mind, and specifically and selectively by attention, because attention gives a direction to the mind, okay? Now, this attention is going to be extremely important when we realize that space has content. So our model and reality regarded as through the space model, okay, has a basic difference. And that is that in our model, okay, there is very little content. There are no effects. There are only positions, okay? So it's only a topographical representation of imaginary distinct points. Now if we think about reality, and if we see reality through the concept, through the model of space, okay, we realize that this space is not empty, it has content. And when we were talking about the direction of the mind, since space, it has content, and that content is different in this point versus this point, our attention, that is the direction of the mind, is going to determine our path, because anywhere we choose to look, we are going to see something different. So we call it densities, okay, as the summation of effects that are noticeable, okay? So something dense means that it's noticed, and the more dense it is, the easier it is to be noticed, okay? So space has content, and because it has content, meaning effects, some of these effects are summated at any point in space, and some are more easy to detect than others, and we call easy to detect summation effects as densities. Okay, now to make this a little bit more clear, we are gonna represent this using the metaphor of physical energy fields, or magnetic fields, or temperature distributions, physical entities. So these densities mean that in some region of space, the magnetic or electromagnetic field, or gravitational or temperature, is a little bit more dense. That means that the effect is easier to detect, okay? And that is represented by the density of these lines here, okay? So we have different densities anywhere we choose to look. So attention is going to determine what you see, because you have different densities anywhere you look, okay? So let's imagine now that space, which is by definition is a model that can only be used together with the concept of time. Now we're going to artificially separate these two things, space and time. So we stop time, okay? We use the metaphor snapshot, when you take a picture, for example, a photograph, okay? So you take a snapshot. In this snapshot, we completely stop time. That means that it's not just that there is no motion, okay? But there is no any kind of change, okay? And that means if there is no change, then there is no process, okay? Processes are stopped because it's a snapshot, okay? So now, because processes are stopped, that means that the content of space will lose its dynamic nature. What does that mean? That the interactions, okay, that produce that dynamic nature of space is going to be lost, right? And because of that, if the interactions are lost because the processes are artificially stopped, that means that it looks to you as if space had a static nature. And static nature, okay, will then create the illusion of borders and separate points. Because, you see, the minute that you restart time, these points are not going to be static anymore, and the influences and interactions and their dynamic nature is going to be revealed. And at that moment you will see that there's really no permanent borders, permanent separations, because everything is changing and changing together, because they are in deep multi-level interaction, okay? So again, this mental image, this tool, this model of space without time is a kind of oversimplification, which sometimes can be used for didactic purposes, or sometimes, to deep analyze some things, but it has a price, and the price is the illusion of separateness, of distinction, of permanence, okay? But these things, they don't apply to reality, because reality is not a snapshot. Reality is change, it's processes, it's motion, okay? Because space is full of influence, interaction, and constant motion and change. And these things, okay, have no definite borders. And if they don't have definite borders, that means that you have a potentially infinite number of influences just going around. And with those influences, these influences themselves interact. So at any point, imaginary point, okay, or region of space, you are going to have a summation of potentially infinite effects. And that summation is dynamic because the effects themselves change each other. Okay? Now, so space, therefore, is continuous. It has to be continuous because there's no influence that has definite borders. Okay, it has no clear boundaries. You know, if you think about an electromagnetic field, if you think about the probability distribution of an electron, okay, then you will understand that there is a finite probability of this electron that you are trying to study to be anywhere, okay? There is no definite border to electromagnetic field. It just goes around, okay? And so that you will understand that there is no effect, okay, that has a definite border. And because effects do not have definite order, in other words, they are not distinct, but they summate, they interact, okay, that means that there is effect everywhere, and those effects are continuously changing, okay? So now, there is no separate imaginary point which is completely devoid of influence, okay? So, in other words, there is no vacuity. What you see as empty, it's empty of something, okay? It's empty of something that you would be able to detect. You don't detect something there, so you call it empty. But emptiness is not vacuity, okay? Because you don't detect something there, something else might be there that you are not able to detect. But if you are a little bit more sophisticated, then you will see it. So in other words, even an artificial intelligence is able to generate this dynamic something out of emptiness, okay? Why? Because even artificial intelligence is able to grasp that everything, even emptiness, is dynamic. Okay? It's not vacuity. It does not mean that there's nothing at all in there. It means that what you expect to be there is not there. Okay? But to imagine that there is absolutely nothing at all in there, in other words, that it is a vacuity, it's only an extension of this is not there, and this is not there, and this is not there. So in other words, historically, when people thought that in a particular region of space there is no air, then they called that a vacuum, okay? They didn't understand that in a vacuum there's light, there's electromagnetism, there are all kinds of particles and radiations going through. There are effect fields, okay? So they just saw that it's a space devoid of air. And they thought that that was vacuity. Why? Because the only thing they were able to detect or think of was air. So even basic science, and most people don't even know this, okay, which is very, very sad. It's an indictment of our scientific education, that this is not an electron, okay? This is not an electron. Electron is a probability distribution, okay, of this imaginary unit of electric charge, which could be anywhere in the universe, but it is more probable to be here rather than here, okay? So there are no definite boundaries. So now, energy in physics is a metaphor for some kind of influence that can be detected by the methods of physics, okay? So energy is, in the natural science physics, a metaphor, a symbol for influence, okay? Now obviously in physics they are not gonna see a poetic influence or emotional influence, okay? So they have a specific word for influence in physics, and that is called energy, okay? influence can be anything. It can be momentum, can be enthusiasm, can be impetus, can be an electric charge change or change in the magnetic field, okay? So, but basically it's manifesting as a fact field flowing freely, okay? So energy has a free flow, okay? And so it's not bound to definite particles, okay? It can be radiation, it can take any form, okay? And energy barriers can be overcome. So, there's no energy barrier that is absolute, okay? Energy barriers and energy always are in a balance, okay? Energy can be diluted, energy can be neutralized, but nevertheless, energy does not disappear. It just changes forms, right? And it diffuses freely. I mean, it's not like it's permanent. So in other words, there is energy, and that energy diffuses and it doesn't change. No, it changes because it's a form of influence, and influence always creates interaction, and interactions are never one-sided, okay? So energy, gravitational energy, electromagnetic energy, okay, is not an absolute thing. It's a interaction, okay, that is detectable, right? Now, effect fields may be infinite. Infinite meaning that they may diffuse out without limitation. And they also may be variable. Attention selects out observed effects, but that doesn't mean that what you're not observing is not there, okay? You observe things, okay, according to a perceived relevance. And that means that your interests and your sensitivity and your memory are going to be very, very important in determining what you are going to observe. And remember, in the direction of the mind, what you choose to observe is going to determine what you're going to see, what your worldview is going to be, right? So, and remember that effect density is absolutely relative to you, okay? So what you are able to detect, whether or not you are able to detect this, or you only are able to detect this, okay? This is high density, this has low density, okay? So if someone dies, okay, that's such a dense effect that you will notice that, okay? You are programmed to notice that. Or somebody is born, okay? So in other words, these are very dense effects. But there are less dense effects, and the more sophisticated you are, the more interested you are, the more emotionally involved you are, okay? You will be able to detect those low densities also, okay? And so the more organized you are, the more you are able to distinguish, okay, things that are even of low density, okay, and they are not separate. It's just that they are there, and they are difficult to detect, but you will be able to detect them, provided that you have an organic attention and a very organized mind, okay. So now, effect density in space. So you can see that this magnetic field right here, okay, is very dense here. So that means that it's going to produce an effect that you are likely to detect, okay? If you have very sophisticated instruments, if you are very sophisticated, if you have the interest of making even subtle observations, okay, then you are less influenced by density, okay? So you will be able to detect these very, very, very low density effects also right here, okay, rather than just here. Now, these densities, of course, change in time. Why? Because any kind of energy is always in interaction with an infinite other type of energy also, okay? So, because they are in interaction of very high complexity, they are going to change in time. Now you may notice them or you might not notice them. This change, okay, may be very subtle, okay, and you have to be very highly invested, okay, to notice these changes. Now, if there are changes that are very easy to detect, for example, again, somebody just died, that's very easy to detect, okay, then even with very low sophistication, you will notice that. Okay, you might notice that the patient that the patient is dying. Okay, you might not notice that unless you really look. Okay, but if you are highly sophisticated, then death is not an event; it's a process. Okay, which has a time point where the density of that process is very high, so anybody can detect it. But you, with your sophistication, you already knew what was going to happen. Okay, so you do not distinguish between one part of the process and another part of the process. You understand the whole process. Okay. For other people, this might seem magic. Okay, but you will be able to predict things because you follow along. You notice, you detect the subtle differences which make up a process. Okay, so effect density is also in emotional space. Okay, there are very dense things, like for example, the interaction between a parent and the child is emotionally very dense. Okay, or you may be very much invested in mathematics or science. Okay, so for you, any subtle idea that you might have may seem like it is very, very high importance. Or the same thing in spirituality, okay? So fact density may be very obvious and may be very high, but also effect densities that are of low intensity, okay, might be very important if you are emotionally invested in that thing, right? So densities are always relative. Relative to your interest, relative to your sensitivity, relative to your to the prior life experience that determined your emotional investment, that determined your sensitivity, you determined your interest. Okay, so life experience is going to be crucial. Okay, in the specific nature of effect density for you. So again, effect fields with varying density change in time. In other words, effect fields are dynamic. Okay? So reality is naturally organic. Why? Because these effect fields constantly interact at multiple levels. And there is no such thing as a one-sided interaction. Okay? There is no such thing as a one-sided influence. When you seem to detect a one-sided influence or interaction, okay, that is in your mind because you focus on one side of the equation, one side of the process, one direction of that chemical process or whatever process, okay? But you will see that really these processes are very complex because many things, okay, will then influence those processes. Okay, so there's no such thing as emptiness. There's no such things as boundaries and separation. You know, you may think that there is a border between this river, okay, and the marshland that is beyond the border of it. Okay. But that changes all the time. Remember, there's water here, there's water here. It's more dense, it's easier to detect here, okay? And this changes minute by minute. There are subtle differences that you tend to ignore because for your purposes, you know, this is important, and for somebody else, it's less important because they are able to see that there is water here also, okay? And remember, effect fields are like an ocean. I mean, there are similar patterns, but the patterns change all the time. Okay, There's no such thing as a solid fixed entity. I mean, even this light tower, okay, will change in time. If you are sufficiently subtle to understand the subtle changes, then you will see those changes, or you invest a long enough time period to observe it, then you will see the changes. Okay? So this is not solid. It may seem solid to you depending on your subtleness and depending on what time period you are investing, okay, to see how permanent this thing actually is. So, effects in time have time densities, like effects in space, they have space densities, okay? Dense time, a lot of perceived changes, easy to perceive changes, okay? Creating the need for a lot of observation, okay? A lot of stimuli, and this time seems to go fast. Time content is richer in energy, momentum accelerates time. Okay. Time content depends on sensitivity, alertness, perceptiveness, and motivation. Okay. So, a math class, for example, if you're interested in mathematics, okay, you are open to mathematics, okay, it excites you, okay, so therefore, time content is going to be very high, because anything that goes on during the math class you are very sensitive to, and therefore for you it has a lot of content, it is rich, okay, and for you time passes, okay. For somebody else who shuts down completely because that somebody else is not interested in mathematics, time is very, very, very slow. And why is that? Because time content is low, because that person, okay, shuts down the perception, the detection, the understanding. In other words, that person will not listen, will not focus the attention. So time is relative, very, very relative to the observer, right? Because time densities, time content, okay, is very highly subjective. So time. We said that time is the average rate of change, but it has also a subjective quality. So it's a subject-dependent average rate of change. If you want to standardize it, then you may imagine, okay, that it will be subject independent. In other words, if you try to create a consensus and you try to remove the concept of time from the differences, inter-subject differences, okay, then you're going to define time as a subject independent average rate of change. But that's imaginary, okay? It is built on a consensus. Okay, it's a highly artificial primitive model, which is a useful tool for coordination. Empty, effect-free, constant time is virtual, equivalent to spatial void. We said that there is no spatial void, but there is no temporal void either. Okay, so in other words, and the relative emptiness of space and time depends on you, right? Because the content is, as a potential, is there. Now you might want to focus on that potential, or you may ignore that potential, but the potential is there in space and in time. And remember, space and time are two aspects, okay, of looking at reality. Aspects that you are programmed to use because of your proprioception, because your detection ability toward change. Since empty and time and space, of course, they are different aspects, but they should be used together. okay? That's why we use the word space-time, okay? Empty space-time is an artifact. Since space-time is full of effects, since only some of these effects are perceived due to different interests, sensitiveness, alertness, perceptiveness, detection capability, okay? Space-time really should be not just space-time, but space-time effect field attention complex. You see, because unless you standardize things based on consensus, okay, the attention is going to select out important relevant things. You are going to be sensitive to those things, and you are going to more easily detect those things. So the content of space-time is going to depend not only on effect fields, but also your attention toward these effect fields, okay? And so we can say that if we make this complex, the STEA complex, or space-time effect field attention complex, we can write the equation that it's never zero, okay? So therefore, space-time has content, and that content will be detected to some degree depending on attention, okay? And so STEA, this complex, which is made up of all these things, is never zero, it's never empty. And it's in constant fluctuation, change, energy flow, and alertness always changes. So then, boundary, perceiving things as separate, would mean an absolute energy barrier. But we see nothing absolute in reality. So why would an energy barrier be absolute? And why would it be permanent? Okay? So absolute void, absolute vacuity, absolute energy barrier, these are all extensions. Okay, so if there is an energy barrier that is this strong and this strong and this strong, okay, it could be extended as infinitely strong, but that's only an extension, it's an artifact, okay? So in fact, there is nothing that can permanently disrupt continuous flow of energy, or let's say diffusion of energy. Energy just diffuses out, radiates, and it goes everywhere, okay? So therefore, absolute void, vacuity, makes no sense. And absolute borders, permanent borders, make no sense. Unless you have a consensus, this is what I'm interested in, this is what I'm able to detect, and I agree not to go beyond that, because I'm not interested, and you should not be either, okay? So attention has a finite point discrimination and the finite span. So boundary is a useful tool, but a primitive model for attention. Why? Because you need to understand that this finite point discrimination and this finite span is relative to the group of people or group of observers. Okay? Some observers may be more interested, may be more focused, and may be able to detect more subtle changes. For them, your absolute is not absolute at all. More refined organic attention needs this tool less and less and less and less. Because the more refined, more organized you are, and organicity is based on life experience, the more unique you are. And the more unique you are, okay, the more you see in your own specific way the energy flow, the fluctuation of the fields, and you will see barriers or vacuity less and less and less and less. Okay? So inorganic attention can be characterized by linearity, separateness, distinctions, fixed, well-defined categories with definite boundaries between them. Okay? This is like that. okay, categories, classifications. Classification is a category, right? With fixed permanent ideas, okay, here depicted as objects. But this is not an ant. This is not an individual ant. This is not an idea of an ant. This is an idealization of an ant. Okay, this is really a category, a class. All right, a category and class depends on your thought process, how you order things, how you organize things. Now, organic flow of attention, organic attention sees things as a process, as a flow. It detects variety. It detects subtle change, okay, forming a dynamic or organic order, okay. So this is like a static order. This is like an organic order, and the difference between this and this is different degrees of fixation. Here, things are absolutely fixed, okay, because what can be fixed? A concept, a category, a class can be fixed. But reality as it works out, as it plays out, okay, cannot be fixed. It's dynamic, okay? It's dynamic and it's full of potentiality. So it cannot be fixed. But again, as a coordinating measure, you may pretend that you can fix it, okay? And that's this. But this is not reality. This is fixed reality. This is artificial reality. This is virtual reality. This is reality, okay? With its dynamism, with its constant change, with its flow of energy, and with its multiple level interaction, okay? This is not like these lions, okay, attacked those, I don't know what they are, okay? So these animals, okay? This is their interaction, okay? And the interaction is never one-sided. They can have multiple level interactions, okay? So, if you go on and continue to imagine that reality is the same thing as your model of reality, then you might imagine that the default, okay, is void, containing separate material units with linear change. And understand that with this model, okay, you imagine space as largely empty, with little content. And most importantly, not only that there are relatively few objects in it, but you imagine that these objects have very little interaction, okay? But if your mind is very highly organized, then you will understand that this is not true, that space has content, okay? Varying densities, energy flow, constant change, variability and organicity, okay? So space is full of interactions, and because they are full of interactions, constantly changes, and it's not homogeneous, it's not uniform. And if it's not uniform, then it's not made up of uniform particles. And the borders are only imaginary, okay? Because they are not permanent and they are not absolute. It depends on your detecting capability, your focus, your subtle observation, the subtleness of your observation, etc. Okay? So this is a default only as a consensus for inert minds. If your mind is highly organized, you will not accept this model. Okay? And you not mix up with a teddy bear with a real bear or a cow, because this model is just not going to be enough for you. Time as we know it, it's local time extended as fixed universal time. Space as we know it It's inorganically infinite, much of it is void, containing little substance. Okay, this is what we have in 2023 in the mind of the majority of humans. And this is pitiful because this depends on your level of inertness of the mind. Space-time is primitive, low-dimensional model, okay, that we project onto an organic reality. So you project this out, like in the very first slide that I showed you. And that's the coordinate system. Okay, it's a primitive model based on consensus. Now, let's talk about systems. When you realize that at a certain level of attention span and detection capability, local influences tend to kind of group together, okay? And so you are able to see the interactions, the local interactions, a little bit more clearly, okay? Whereas you might not be able to detect the interaction between this thing and this thing, okay? Then you say that these local things where interactions between this region and this region is obvious, whereas the interaction between this region and this region is not obvious, okay? Then you call this a system, okay? So a system is a unit of attention, what you're able to see as being functionally connected versus what you are not able to see as being functionally connected with this, okay? So a system is a unit of attention, a limited extension, limited number of variables, limited complexity we perceive during a local inquiry out of an organic whole. So in reality, okay, if you're sophisticated enough, this region of space is also in close interaction with this region of space. But since you might not be able to see the interactions between here and here, you think that this is a finite, bounded functional unit, okay? And you call that a system. So a system, if you focus enough on it, seems like a complex local unit which is artificially isolated for the purpose of study. Okay, so now when you focus on this area of reality, okay, then you will understand that it's a very complex and organic, but you will focus on this. So you're not going to focus on the very difficult to detect interactions between this and this, okay? So then you call this an environment of the system and you call this a system. Okay, so it's only didactic, it's only an oversimplified thing. Nevertheless, a system, the idea of the concept of a system is very useful because you have to focus on something, so you might as well describe it as a functional unit. So a system is always local. Now what you determine as locality depends on how much you see the density of, local density of interactions, okay? System appears to be self-contained, okay, with functional units inside it, okay? And it has a certain degree of robustness. Why? Because a system has a uniqueness, and that uniqueness may be influenced by outside influences, okay? But this uniqueness to a large degree remains. You have to have a very high density and long-standing influence to change the inherent uniqueness of a locality. Okay, that's that fact we call the robustness of the system. Okay, A system is able to digest and integrate a certain amount of foreign influences without losing stability, using all kinds of compensations. Okay? Compensations. Sweating or shivering or eating something cold. Okay? These are compensations toward temperature. Okay? In physiology, we call this trying to maintain a homeostasis. Okay? So a local system is trying to maintain its stability, okay, by compensating to various foreign influences. But again, this system is a model. You have to understand. It's not. It's just. It requires a degree of simplification. So again, a system is local. Because it is local, it is also unique, and this local uniqueness needs to be protected. Okay, now a race or uniform influences, okay, they decrease the local uniqueness. You have to have some robustness, okay, to fight these kind of unifying effects, uniform creating effects. Okay, so your mental health, okay, needs robustness to maintain stability. Okay, and remember, what makes uniform, what converge, is usually parasitical. Okay, so in an attempt to maintain your mental health, you have to have a large degree of robustness, and for robustness, you need abundance of organizing knowledge. So, a system always needs to be put into context, okay? Remember that the system is always subject to processes, changes. It has a time evolution, okay? System robustness has limits, and systems always change, sometimes very substantially, sometimes so substantially that we separate in time a system from based on some specific time point, and you call it another system. Okay, like a tribe will be so culturally influenced by another tribe that you call it a different tribe. Okay, and we ignore continuity between what was before and what was after, because there was such a sudden, easy to detect change. But remember that the system is ultimately a model, and all models are artifacts. Okay, it is an angle from which it is studied, and that needs to be weighed in. In other words, what you call a nation, okay, what you call a tribe, what you call a religious tradition, a form of religious tradition, okay, it always studied from an angle, from a special angle, okay, and you will understand that linguistically, this tribe is now different because they changed their language. But that's from the point of view of linguistics. From the point of view of genetics or biology, that tribe did not convert, did not change its fundamentally unique local nature. It just, from the linguistic point of view, it's changed its language, okay? Which is a major change, but not an absolute change. So you need to understand that the system, okay, is not a separate entity. It is regarded as separate for methodical and didactic purposes. System extended is reality. So you study this system, and you study this system, and you study this system, and you extend the idea of a system, and you call that reality, okay? But notice that it's only an extension, okay? Reality itself is not limitless extension of one particular system, but it has infinite potentiality, okay? So, yeah, reality can also be regarded as a system, except that reality has much less limitation, or possibly no limitation at all, in terms of its potentiality. And space and time really is an artificial fixations in regards to reality, okay? Reality is alive, it's dynamic, okay? It has infinite complexity. So it's not composed of systems, right? Or subsystems, except in, in your imagination, if you choose that path. So reality is not fixed, dynamic, yet it's not lacking organic order. It's lacking simple order, okay? So if you have three categories, by those three categories, you might not detect any order at all. Why? Because you think that based on those three categories of variables, okay, that there's a large amount of randomness. And randomness is created, the idea of randomness is created by you not being able to see, okay, what this thing is in interaction with. Okay, you don't see the larger picture. That's why you focus on this and you see this as random. And therefore you do not detect the order which is underlying. Okay? So a system has a lot to do with scale of perception, span of attention. Okay? Whereas reality has nothing to do with this. Okay? Reality is just there. Reality cannot be described by this simple law or this simple pattern, okay? Because reality is just that rich. It's rich in potentiality, so that it cannot be determined by 2 or 3 or 5 factors. So, the human individual is the ultimate of the idea of a system. Why is that? It's because we are very familiar, okay, with the concept of human individual and the subtle differences between human individuals. So in other words, if you look at these facial expressions, for example, okay, you are very sensitive because they are so important in your life, okay? They're very sensitive in even the subtlest changes in facial expression and differences between facial expressions, okay? So the ultimate reality for you is the familiar things. And the familiar things, because you are very focused on them, okay, have a large degree of subtleness. So the human individual as a system, okay, is very important for you. And therefore you study it with very high emotional intensity, okay? Whereas other things you are less emotionally invested in. So therefore, if you have any idea of reality at all, and you want to simplify reality, then you connect with such a hard to understand thing with something that you are most familiar with, and that is the human individual. So you connect the two things, and you have the idea of personal divinity. Reality as a human individual, you see. But this thing, again, is an oversimplification. This thing, again, is an extension of something that you are familiar with. And it's natural. And it is based on consensus. And it's useful. But you have to understand that for somebody who is trying to understand things very, 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 very deeply, these extensions, these concepts, these models, okay, may be less relevant than for you who choose the path of mental inertia, okay? So the degree of mental investment will determine what models you are willing to accept and how much you are trying to make these models more sophisticated, okay? Human individuals, okay, as models, because they are models and concepts, okay, not real things. Human individuals remain important for anybody at any subtleness, at any organizational level, okay? But they are less absolute. They are less separated, okay? They are less permanent for somebody who understands that human individuals are systems, and systems are in organic, multi-level interaction with their environment, and they do not have an absolute border, neither in space nor in time. Let's translate this in common terms. Human individuals, they are not a separate entity, not a uniform entity, and they do not have a separate border in space or in time. So human individuals are immortal because they don't have a separate existence, neither in space nor in time. If they don't have a separate existence, they don't have an absolute border in space or in time. Okay? And this idea of immortality, okay, at the level of mental inertia, okay, is projected as personal divinity. So with this, I thank you for your attention, and goodbye for now.